Hello, everyone. And welcome. My name is Stephanie Walker. I'm Director of the Office of Challenge Programs at NEH and have been working with several colleagues on putting together the American Rescue Plan Humanities Grantmaking program. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Chris Thornton, to start us off with the webinar presentation today. And after we both talk for a bit and explain the slides, there will be an extended question and answer session. While we are speaking, you can type questions into the appropriate box on your screen, and we have several colleagues standing by who will try to answer your questions while we are talking, and we can go over some of those at the end of the presentation for everyone to hear and discuss. So without further ado, Chris, will you, I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Thornton. I'm Director of the Research Division. And with Stephanie, we've been heading up this American Rescue Plan for Humanities Grantmaking. So today we kind of wanted to walk through what many of you have seen on the website and in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO. We'll try to avoid our government acronyms, but sometimes old habits are hard to break. So we're just going to go through the salient points. As Stephanie said, if you have questions while we're speaking, please go ahead and put them into the chat box. And somebody will do their best to respond either in writing or one of us will say something. So with that, why don't we get going? Stephanie, you're in control of the slides, I believe. Yes. Okay. So as you all know, with the American Rescue Plan Act that they just put forward at the beginning of this year, the NEH received $135 million. This is a great help to the humanities sector. 40% automatically goes to our amazing partners of the state humanities councils for their regranting efforts in states at the local and regional level. The other 60%, which is going to be roughly $70 to $75 million, is going to go to two programs that we're going to explain quickly. So as I mentioned, the state humanities councils will continue their efforts to support local and statewide humanities sector. We do have what we would call an open call, or a funding opportunity for organizations in need. And again, to emphasize, this is stimulus money meant to support those who are suffering as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. That will be an important point to raise in any application you submit for this ARP funding. The open call, there's a different webinar that's already posted on the website. So for those interested in supporting your own organization, we encourage you to go to that website and look for that pre-recorded webinar. The third stream is the one we're here to talk about today. That is our regranting effort. And the idea is to regrant at the national or regional multi-state level. So again, where the state councils will cover a more local and statewide efforts, we want to make sure we don't lose the mid-size organizations or particularly individuals who are in need due to the COVID pandemic. So what was the purpose of this regranting effort? We're looking for organizations who have the capacity for and prior success in running competitive grant programs. Your organization must demonstrate that you can reach a subset of the humanities, either organizations or individuals, at a national or multi-state level. And you may propose a grant program either for organizations or for individuals, but not both. Your proposed grant program must be designed to alleviate the negative impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So what this means is we will expect in your application, and panelists will be expecting, that you will identify a particular audience, a particular group of subrecipients, whether they're organizations or individuals, who have a demonstrated need due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And you should argue to design or to run a grant program that will alleviate that need. Your review process must follow NEH's standards, which, as many of you know, are very high standards. You may not restrict eligibility or give preferences to members of a certain organization, consortium, or network. So that is, it must be an open call for those in need. And you must ensure a fair and informed selection of subrecipients by relying on the recommendations of an external committee composed of qualified individuals drawn from outside the organization's staff and governing bodies. What that means is if you are a membership organization, you are allowed to have members as panelists, but you'll see in our notice of funding opportunity that the majority of your panelists, of your reviewers, must be outside of that membership, okay? So the whole point is to try to have as unbiased a process as possible in order for a fair selection of subrecipients. So as I mentioned, there's two streams to this. One is you can make an application for grant making to individuals. These are individual American citizens. We'll get to that in a bit. You may ask for up to $2 million for this effort. That $2 million will include your management and administrative costs and in any indirect costs. So management and administrative costs would be direct costs associated with running, maintaining this grant program that you're going to do. That could include honoraria for your panelists, for example, staffing needs, direct staffing needs for this. Indirect costs, as many of you know, is more sort of institutional support. So that $2 million is the total amount you may ask for. If you are applying for grants for organizations, you may ask for up to $5 million, again, including M&A and IDC, management and administrative costs and indirect costs. All right, as with all programs, this program has criteria that panelists will use to determine who should be awarded these regranting efforts. These criteria, just quickly, obviously the quality of the program that you've designed. This can either be a new program or an existing program. Your capacity as an organization to administer these grants, both to run the process and then to manage it on the back end. The humanities significance, of course, as with all NEH programs. What impact will this have on the greater humanities landscape, particularly in the United States, but not exclusively? Fairness of selection process, as I mentioned, we'll be looking, and our panelists will be looking to make sure that you're maintaining a fair and equitable process following the rules of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. And the fifth criterion is feasibility of timeline and budget. You'll see in the next slide that we have a pretty tight timeline. We're trying to get the stimulus money out fast. So we want to see that your organization is able to hit the ground running and really try to get these funds out to those in need as quickly as possible. Okay, this is all on the website and in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Your application to us is due by May 13th. We will be running the process as quickly as possible, but you will be notified one way or the other by the end of August. The earliest you may start your award will be September 1st of this year. You must have applications to your program. So again, you're applying to us to design a grants program, so your applicants must apply to you by December 31st. So you see what we mean by hit the ground running. The expectation is you know how to run grant programs, you have existing programs that you can just tweak in order to really get this moving. And your applicants must find out about their awards by March 1st, okay? Or your selection at least must occur by March 1st of next year. It's a tight timeline, we understand that. We're working fast, we hope you will too. Eligibility. Obviously, as with all NEH grants, your organization must be a U.S. nonprofit, 501c3 status, or federally recognized Native American tribal government. You must currently administer a competitive grant-making program to organizations or individuals in the humanities. And as I mentioned before, we're looking to see that you have both either national or multi-state regional experience in grant-making. If you grant-make at a state level, you're not eligible. You're not competitive. Institutions of higher education, units of state and local government, the state humanities councils obviously are getting their own funds. For-profit organizations and foreign organizations are not eligible to apply. In the grant program for organizations, who is eligible to be a sub-awardee or a subrecipient? That is, who is eligible to apply to your program? Obviously, U.S. nonprofit organizations are the main ones. That includes accredited public 501c3 institutions of higher education. So you remember in the last slide, we said that universities, colleges are not eligible to apply to us directly for grant-making funds. They are eligible to apply to your program to be subrecipients of these funds. Federally recognized Native American tribal governments, of course, are also eligible to be subrecipients, state and local governmental agencies as well. In your grant-making program for organizations, you'll be issuing sub-awards rather than contracts to subrecipients. So they're applying to you with a budget and a plan for what they're going to do with your funding. Just a side note, for eligible American organizations located overseas, sub-awards cannot be used to support non-US citizens. So if you have staff on the ground who are non-US, you can't include them as direct salary costs, direct costs in their applications to you, if that makes sense. In the grant-making program for individuals, this is limited, of course, to US citizens as your applicants, that is the subrecipients. Whether they reside in or out of the United States, both are eligible as long as they're citizens. Other people who are eligible are foreign nationals who have been living in the United States or its jurisdictions for at least 3 years prior to the application deadline. That would be your application deadline. So your applications are due latest by December 31st. So they've lived in the United States at least 3 years prior to that deadline. These subrecipients, these applications must come to you as requests for stipends. That is generally done in stipend months, although not necessarily. But the point is that your subrecipients must request time to do something. They are not subawards. What this means is they should not be applying to you with specific budgets. For example, I need this much for my stipend, this much for travel, this much for, subsistence. These are not subawards, these are subrecipients. They should be applying to you with a request for a certain amount of time to conduct a program, a project, something they're working on as individuals. If you have questions about that, please reach out to us. We'll do our best to answer them. But this is the main difference between the grant program for organizations and the grant program for individuals. Note, grant programs for individuals, the subrecipients, their organizations are not applying. Their organizations cannot ask for indirect costs, for example, versus in the grant programs for organizations, that is absolutely an allowable cost from a subrecipient for subawardees. Next slide, please. Stipends for individuals. So these grant programs for individuals, we have to be very careful not to overlap with other federal funding. So stipends or the subrecipients, the applicants to your program, these are not intended for individuals who are already retired, those who are under 18, those who are on Social Security disability or inmates. Unfortunately, K through 12 teachers and administrators, homeschooling instructors, journalists, and of course the creative and performing arts professionals are not eligible to be subrecipients. Individuals currently enrolled in degree programs, including those working in dissertations, are not eligible. So unfortunately, these are not intended to be for dissertation completion grants, for example, for those seeking tuition for a master's program, not eligible. With that, I'll pass it back to Stephanie.
Thank you, Chris. So I'm taking over here to talk to you a little bit about restrictions. Remember that the restrictions in section D6 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity is an important section to look at early in your planning as you think about your application. And you need to think about restrictions on two levels. Those that apply to your organization as the applicant to NEH, and those that apply to the subrecipients of your grant program, be they organizations or individuals. There are certain costs and activities that are disallowed for all recipients, both NEH awardees and their subrecipients. Let me see, I think, yeah, sorry, I had the wrong slide up. This is the first one that I wanted to talk about. So the first and perhaps most of these are pretty obvious, but the most important one that I want to highlight here is the one about overlapping costs. So no double dipping of federal funds. And regarding pending or approved applications for federal funding, please keep in mind that your organization it may also apply to the other ARP or SHARP program, the Humanities Organizations Program. Your organization can apply to any other NEH opportunity or other federal sources of funding, but you must be careful that what you are requesting, the budget items and related activities, do not overlap, right? There's a limitation on reimbursement for pre-award costs to 90 days. And thirdly, and most obviously, perhaps your organization's activities, your proposed grant program, and the awards this grant program would make must be in the humanities. There are a few other additional restrictions that apply to your organization and to subrecipients, and the last three bullets that describe restrictions are common to all applications and to grant programs at NEH. And please note that the restrictions that I've put up on these slides are not comprehensive. You must go to the Notice of Funding Opportunity to see the complete list. So these last two slides were restrictions that apply to both you or your organization as the applicant to NEH and to the sub-recipients of your grant program. Now I'm going to highlight a few restrictions that apply either to grant programs for organizations or grant programs for individuals. So regarding grant programs to organizations, I just want to highlight one here that has actually come up in a question before. You cannot propose a grant program to organizations where the subrecipient organization is going to run another grant program. So it can't be a re-granting program. You heard from Chris about who would be eligible to apply to your grant program for individuals as subrecipients. Here, I'll just emphasize once more the restriction on support for students enrolled in a degree program and the types of writing and outputs that NEH considers outside of the humanities. That would include guidebooks, how-to and self-help books, creative writing, autobiography, memoirs, creative nonfiction, and the creation and performance of art, as well as policy studies and impact assessments. Again, for the details, please look at the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO. Now, having come up with a program plan and taken into consideration the restrictions, you're ready to write or put together the application itself. And as with many or most NEH programs, the core piece of your application is the narrative. And I just want to give you some basic tips about that. Diligently follow the formatting and organization guidelines. And make your narrative and the total application a coherent whole. In spite of the many different attachments that the NOFO lists, remember to think of the application holistically. Provide all the information that's requested, but don't repeat yourself. I'll also highlight to pay attention to the work plan so that it dovetails with the narrative and the budget. You can use a Gantt chart for your work plan, but you don't have to. Here are the subheadings and components of the narrative itself. So start off with a really excellent one-page statement that grabs the reader's attention and convinces them that your organization is the right one to run the fantastic grant program that you are proposing, a grant program that addresses pandemic relief for humanities organizations or humanities professionals. The next part of the narrative, in the next part of the narrative on institutional capacity, you should tell the reader about your organization's activities in the humanities in general, and then in grant making in particular. Third, describe your grant program and provide more details about who the program is for and how it was designed and how it's supposed to work. Fourth, selection. Outline the procedures to demonstrate the fairness of the selection process. Chris has mentioned that earlier too. How will the selection committee members be chosen? What is your conflict of interest policy? Describe the full process of selection. And finally, program evaluation. How will you manage and monitor the program and its awardees? What are your expectations of your subrecipients? And what kind of reports or other information will you collect? That's in addition to what you see on the screen. And again, the NOFO contains further details on how to structure this part of the application. Finally, NEH also has expectations regarding the management of your award. Of course, you will need time to set up and run the competition for your grant program. As the guidelines say, your own awardees or the subrecipients can have a maximum award period of 1 year, and therefore NEH expects your grant to have a 2-year period of performance. You will need to submit 3 performance reports to NEH in addition to the financial reports. The first one is expected after the selection of the recipients of your grant program. So that we expect that by April 30th, 2022 at the latest. The second would be an annual performance report at the first year mark of your grant, so probably around September, October 2022. And the last performance report would come at the end of your award period, October, November 2023, and then you have a certain amount of time to prepare this report. I'll end with the evaluation criteria because they are so central to what we do, and a strong application will pay attention to the criteria. A well-written application makes it easy for your reviewers to find where you are addressing the evaluation criteria, and the guidelines include helpful pointers about where reviewers will look for information on which criteria. I'm sure you have plenty of questions. I see there's great activity in the Q&A column, but you should know that there's a great team ready to answer all your questions. In addition to Chris and myself, there's senior program officers Jeff Burrows and John Cox actively working on your questions right now, and we can perhaps talk about some of those. Chris, I don't know if you or Jeff or John, are there questions that we should mention out loud here in the live event to make sure that everyone has enough clarity on those?
There was a lot of questions about indirect costs on the subawards and subrecipients, whether that's allowable. We've answered them mostly, and I believe this is correct. So there's a restriction in this program that 90% of the funds must go to your subawardees, whether they're individuals or organizations. That means that management and administrative costs and indirect costs, so both the direct costs and the indirect costs, must fit within the 10% allowable on top of that 90%. And that goes obviously for both programs, for organizations and individuals. Indirect costs cannot be applied to the funds that you are granting. So your organization can ask for indirect costs on the management and administrative costs, on the direct, that is the direct costs. But you will not be allowed to ask for indirect costs on the 90% that is going out your doors, if that makes sense.
Right. Thanks, Chris. I don't know if either of the people from the Office of Grant Management who are here in this meeting want to speak about indirect costs, not indirectly, but directly to us now. Otherwise, you can write an email to grantmanagement@neh.gov and ask your question there, and someone from the Office of Grant Management will reply.
If Tim Kerrigan is on the line, there is a question about clarifying the difference between making a subaward versus giving a contract. We state in our notice of funding opportunity that grant making to organizations cannot be to give contracts, they must be subawards. If Tim's there, he might have a better way to explain this.
Sure, Chris, this is Tim, and I was actually just looking up, I wanted to just look at I was referring to something in the NOFO about indirect too. So just could we circle back to that in 1 minute?
Sure.
I'd be glad to
Absolutely.
help.
Thanks, Tim.
Oh, no problem.
It's a question from Jim Grossman. Jim, if you're there, I need a bit of clarification. You write, in identifying the constituency, how specific should we be about the categories that are eligible, and should we show we know that constituency? Apologize, I don't quite get the question. Is there a way you could rephrase that? I'm sorry, you're not allowed to speak. If you could type.
You'll have to type it into the question and question box. I also want to emphasize once more, I think we didn't say that in the beginning, we just mentioned it in the Q&A, but yes, this webinar will be recorded, and then it takes us a day or two to get it up on our website, but it will be there for you along with slides to refer to after today.
More questions coming in. Good. Can subrecipient organizations be schools, districts? That's a good question.
I want to also emphasize one question that's already published, but where they say to be extra clear, the granting organization must already be successful in granting in the humanities, but in more than one state. That is correct and important. So the applicant to NEH must have experience in grant making at a national level or a multi-state / regional. Regions aren't specifically defined, but it has to be clear from your from your description of your organization and your experience with grant making, that it is multi-state.
Chris, this is Tim from OGM. Can I jump back in on that question
Please.
about indirect from a second ago?
Yes, please.
And then I'll follow up on the second one too. I think I just want to clarify the way that folks should calculate their indirect on this program, just because it is fairly different than most of our other programs at NEH, particularly with the inclusion of the management and administrative costs. So your management and administrative costs are capped at 10%, as you said. The other 90% of the award, or more if you claim less in M&A, includes the subrecipients, subawards, or stipends, and allowable indirect costs. So M&A does not include your indirect. It's a separate pool, and it's important to know as you're preparing your budgets that you not just, as Stephanie mentioned earlier, about sort of overlapping costs and avoiding double dipping. If you are claiming costs that are part of your indirect rate, you should not also claim them as part of your M&A. They should be in one place or the other. And to follow up a little bit further about the calculation of indirect on subawards, which is different for individuals than it is for organizational subawards. So for participant support costs, which includes stipends for individuals in this program, you are not allowed to claim indirect on those. However, for subawards to organizations, you may claim indirect costs on some portion of each subaward, depending on the nature of your indirect cost rate agreement. If you have questions about that, please feel free to email grantmanagement@neh.gov, and we can walk you through that a little bit better to make sure you're preparing your budgets in according to the rules governing this competition.
Thank you, Tim, very much. So let me read you one question to see if that is correct. So to confirm, for a $5 million award, the total M&A plus indirect costs could be no higher than $500,000, regardless of your negotiated indirect cost rate. Is that correct?
So M&A would be capped if you were to claim, request the full $5 million. Your M&A costs would be capped at $500,000. Of the other $4.5 million, that would include both your subawards and your allowable indirect. So M&A is distinct from your indirect.
I think that's helpful. Thank you.
And Chris, could you remind me, I'm sorry, what was the second question you asked me to look into? I apologize.
No, it's fine. There's a question about the difference between subawards through the grant making for organizations and contracts. It states in our that we're not allowed to do contracts, or they're not allowed to do contracts. Can you explain that?
Yes. So in 2 CFR 200, which is the set of rules that govern federal grant making, there are slightly different rules that govern the way that you as a recipient would manage the relationship with someone who was considered to be a contractor, which is usually a vendor providing services to you, versus a subrecipient who is someone doing programmatic work. essential to the project in some way. And we are just affirming for you as applicants that we consider your selected applicants to be subrecipients rather than contractors.
I think, Chris, we should leave matters here with the webinar. I know there are many more questions that you have, but please feel free to contact us at the email addresses given on the last slide. Programmatic questions to ARP grantmaking at NEH.gov, and budget or IDC and M&A questions to grant management at NEH.gov. We thank you very much for attending the webinar and look forward to your applications. Have a good afternoon and thank you.